Why, hello, folks. Howdy ho. I'm back. I'm back with more Limbo. So here's the thing. This build that I just sort of stumbled upon, this intrigued me so much that I have spent some considerable time, like, sort of experimenting with this and sort of trying to figure out how this works. And I think I've got the gist of it. Like, people had a lot of theories back in the previous post I made about this build, talking about like exactly how this interaction works, because people couldn't really sort of put their finger on like what's happening in this boss fight, or not in this with this interaction between these two abilities. So I'll just give people a very quick refresher, just what it is I'm talking about with this build, so that you understand what all the hubbub is about. And that's right, people. I am giving more attention to this interaction. I got so many comments saying like, you need to delete this. You need to delete this video because if DE finds out about this, they are going to nerf it. And they might. They might. But I don't care. I'm gonna make videos about it. So, here's how it works. Tesla Bank and Cataclysm equals instant death. Yeah. Equals instant death to anything that doesn't have innate damage reduction. Anything that doesn't have armor or... And since this is electricity damage, anything that doesn't have resistance to electricity damage. Like, for example, a shock Eximus, something like that. So enemies that have damage reduction, this doesn't work on, which means it only works on Corpus and Infested, but it works very well against Corpus and Infested. So I've subsumed Vauban's Tesla Nervos into Limbo, and I'm using the augment called Tesla Bank. This combo does not work without the augment, so the augment's doing all the damage. As you can see what it does, when it has a Nervos attached, any damage dealt to it will be absorbed by the Nervos and channeled into a burst of electricity. As you can see, I have, like, no power strength whatsoever. So, it's not about, like, the power strength doesn't affect this ability, which is why, like, Rift Surge and stuff doesn't matter either, like, bumping damage. No, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Because Tesla Bank does a set percentage of the enemy's health as damage. Now, what happens in this case with this interaction is that Tesla Bank does 100% of the enemy's health as damage. So, I'm gonna explain, because I've been testing this out. There was a guy, here, I'm gonna put this up on screen right now. There was a guy who was pointing out a very interesting interaction that happens with the Tilregger boss fight. And the Tilregger boss fight, if you have played that, farming for Equinox, you will know that there is a phase in the fight where he leaves the boss arena and he spawns in a bunch of maniacs. And you have to kill the maniacs before Tilregger comes back, so you can fight him again. But if you banish the maniacs into the Cataclysm, or into the Rift Plane, either by using Cataclysm or by using Banish, this will make Tilregger come back to the boss fight. And that sort of, like, just leads credence to the theory that I have about what is happening here. It's more straightforward than people think. People had, like, all these theories about, like, just damage calculations and chain reactions and double and quadruple and 8 times that procs, and no, that's not what's happening at all. It's so much simpler than that. And that is, apparently, the coding of the game seems to think that in some regards, enemies that are banished into the rift momentarily count as being dead, or they transfer to another state of existence, which triggers on-death effects. So it triggers the on-death effect of Tilregger's boss fight, and there aren't that many on-death effects in the game, but Tesla Bank is one of them. So basically, when you banish an enemy into the rift, Tesla Bank thinks that the enemy just died. That's what happens. So what the Tesla bank does, or the Tesla Nervos, is that when it latches onto an enemy, right when it latches onto an enemy, there, it snapshots what the enemy's current health is right when it latches on. Okay? And then you sort of like, you kill it, and then it explodes to everything around it. See? All of them died. Because when it attached, it was at full health. So what happens is, when you attach a Tesla ball to an enemy, and then you banish it into the rift, this little ball assumes that you just did 100% of the enemy's health in one attack. So it channels an explosion that does 100% of the enemy's health as damage to everything around it. So, like, yeah, obviously a chain reaction here because so many people were attached, had balls attached to them. That's what happens. That's the interaction. So, it's no damage calculations at all. It is just straight up, this will always deal 100% of the enemy's base health as damage. It's an auto kill. It's an auto delete. It does not matter what level the enemy is. It does not matter if it has shields. It doesn't matter how much HP it has. You can push this up to level 9,999 and it will still one-shot any enemy in the game with one attack, because it will always deal 100% of the enemy's health as damage. The only exception is that it doesn't take into account damage reduction. Enemies that have innate damage reduction will not take 100% of their health as damage, because it will be reduced. So, enemies that have like stupid armor values, like corrupted heavy gunner, stuff like that, they won't get hurt by this, or they'll get a little bit hurt, but not a lot. And again, I've also discovered like a Shock Eximus is also not killed by this because he's resistant to electricity damage. So it'll also get reduced. But if the enemies do not have damage reduction, they will die. Straight up die. So I went into Steel Path Survival to test this. I tested both Corpus and Grenier. No, not Grenier. I tested Corpus and Infested. Corpus is a struggle. It really is. Because this build cannot deal with nullifiers. Since you're doing all of your damage as like ability damage, nullifiers are just gonna negate this build entirely. And there's no way around it. You have to kill them with your weapons, and then that's not gonna scale infinitely. And if you play Corpus Survival, like eventually you're just gonna be swarmed with nullifiers everywhere, and it's just not gonna work. So it's Infested Survival. Infested Survival is where this build shines. Because there's huge pools of enemies. They're coming at you from every direction. It's very easy to group large piles of enemies together, so it doesn't matter which enemy it has the Tesla attached to it, even if it's like a little crawler or something. There's just gonna be so many enemies that have these things attached to them, and the detonations are gonna like wipe everything. If you're lucky, the ball will attach itself to an Eximus unit, and then when you do the detonation, everything around you dies. And you just spam Cataclysm anyway, and watch as the balls move from one target to another, and, you know, eventually your surroundings are gonna die. Now, this build suffers from the same liabilities that Limbo always suffers from, which is the vulnerability that he has moving in and out of the rift planes. So it requires a bit of finesse to use this, and you sort of have to get into a rhythm of how you deploy your stasis, how you deploy your Cataclysm, when you move in and out, when you refresh, so to speak, so to not instantly die. There's one thing I would like to add to this build that I currently don't have, and that is Rolling Guard. So I guess I'm gonna have to run some arbitrations to get the Rolling Guard mod. Rolling Guard gives you a bit of invulnerability with a cooldown when you do a roll. And rolling is how Limbo darts in and out of the rift, which means that when you have to dart out of the rift momentarily, which is like the point where you die a lot of times, you'll get a bit of invulnerability to sort of negate that. And I think that's sort of the final piece of the puzzle to make this build really viable to climb far in like infested survival. I ran it by myself in solo. I could push for about an hour until I depleted my 6 deaths and I had to extract because, you know, dying again means a mission failure. With Rolling Guard, I think you could probably go twice as long. I think you can probably push it like easily 2 hours in infested survival before, you know, you just accidentally die from time to time. I also chose to put in an arcane resistance in this build, simply because if you are playing infested survival, then eventually, like, the entire map is just covered in toxin cloud. So even if you dart in and out of the rift very quickly and your shield gating is going to protect you from the actual sort of damage, you're still going to get hit by like a toxin status proc, which is probably going to kill you. So that was like another thing that sort of made me rack up deaths unnecessarily. So other than that, it's just I want a fair bit of duration, because duration means that your Tesla Nervos lasts longer before you have to reapply it, which is nice little convenience. And I am jumping in and out of the Cataclysm. I'm keeping it up for a while if I can. I'm trying to keep stasis always up. So you do want a bit of duration on this build. Other than that, like, you can sacrifice all the power strength. You don't need power strength whatsoever. Hell, you don't need corrosive projection either, because you're not going to be fighting against enemies that have armor with this build. So you can just swap out the corrosive projection for something else. Whatever, basically. Anything is better than this. I haven't put a lot of forma in this. I would like to fiddle with it and put some, you know, swap some stuff around. I don't really want to run with Augur Message. I'm going to chuck that if I can and put in Rolling Guard when I get it. Those are probably the 2 big changes I'm going to make to the mod setup. But otherwise, it looks pretty much like I want it to look. And otherwise, your weapons and stuff, this doesn't matter. You're not using your weapons. You can just bring whatever. It really does not matter what you use, because you are killing people with Tesla balls and Cataclysm. And that's it. That's the only thing you're using. So that's how the build works. I'm pretty sure I've nailed down exactly what is happening with this interaction. And then the big question on everyone's lips is like, is DE going to nerf this when they find out about this interaction? I'm gonna say it's a 50-50 chance, and I'm not sure if I even would like sort of disagree with a nerf in this case. And not that I think this is broken. I don't think this is broken. It is one mission type where this build excels, and that is Steel Path Infested Survival. That's where this is good. It's not really good for anything else, but it's very good for Steel Path Infested Survival, giving you like another build that can climb infinitely. In theory, you can get up to level 9999 with this build. Same way you can with like Zaku, because Zaku also has an ability that scales infinitely, which is his Grasp of Loke, because the damage is based on the enemy weapon damage. The enemy weapon damage is scaling forever, so his damage is also scaling forever. So he can also go infinite. This is a build that can go infinite in one specific mission type. That's not the issue. The issue is that clearly this is not supposed to happen, because Tesla Nervos, or these Tesla balls, are supposed to trigger on death. But this is a weird interaction where you make them trigger when they're not supposed to. They're not supposed to trigger on enemies that aren't dead. They're not supposed to trigger just because something moves into the rift plane. I can't imagine that's intended. And it's this build sort of also highlights another thing, and this is probably the real problem. It's probably not so much this build. It's the fact that it's apparent from this interaction that Limbo can abuse abilities that trigger on death. So that's kind of a big deal, because that limits future design options for the game. Whenever they want to add any sort of new thing to the game that triggers on death, they also first have to ask themselves, wait, what about Limbo? Does this break the game with Limbo? And that's an even bigger problem now, because Limbo's subsumable ability is Banish, which means that now every Warframe in the game can push things into the Rift. Which means that every Warframe in the game now can abuse abilities that trigger on death. And I have to imagine that the DE has to fix that somehow. Currently there are very few on-death triggers in the game. Like, I can think of this ability, I can think of... think of the Tesla Nervos. I can think of the Tileregger boss fight. But I can't really think of all that many other sort of offensive abilities. Like that or interactions that have like on-death triggers that would be problematic. But I'm sure they exist. And people who are smarter than me are gonna be able to come up with them. And like I said, if they want to design stuff in the future with on-death triggers, Limbo can possibly break those. And now every Warframe can break those, because every Warframe can get Banish. So I'm actually thinking that by necessity, DE are eventually going to fix this mechanic and make it so that this can't happen. I think so. It might not be high priority, but I think it's eventually gonna happen. So if you like this build, and if you think it's cool, and you want to sort of like take it for a spin, take Limbo into Infested Survival, and collect some steel essence, then I suggest you do it now. Because I would not be surprised if this is considered a problem from the developers, like design-wise, that this is something that is actually broken in the game and needs to be fixed. I would not be surprised. So yeah, Tesla Limbo. Have fun with it while you can.